Okay, welcome back this afternoon. This next presentation is going to be by me. You're probably tired to see me up front at this point, but I'll have to deal with it for a little bit longer. Okay, let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for the opportunity to come together and to share ideas and to be inspired by your leading in the lives of everyone around us and are guiding us for the future in the mission field. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, what I wanted to do was talk about, one, what AngelOne is, kind of, and what it ends it, and two, just the challenges of supporting mission aviations from the stateside perspective, so to speak. So, brief history on AngelOne. I became involved in AngelOne very early on. I think it's the fall of 2020. Curtis reached out to me to do some conversations we had in mission aviation. They were just getting the organization going and those kind of details. It was an advisory panel to start with. Norman was on that with some of the rest of us, except Judd, Curtis, and others interested in that. And then it morphed into a formal organization with a board and that procedure. We had a model early on. We're trying a membership-based thing. We completely scrapped that after about a year because it wasn't going to work and it wasn't viable. And we realized that and said this is not the path forward. So we took a whole bunch of Trevor's hard work on paperwork and threw it in the bin and started over. Or did a hard pivot. And as an organization, it's only 3 years old, we're still pivoting on a regular basis because we're adapting to what's needed in the mission field. We're still figuring out what's needed in the mission field. We're still figuring out how to function here to best support the mission field. It's a work in progress. I want to remind people that an organization tends to become an anomalous entity. An organization is some paperwork and people. That's what it is. And AngelOne is some paperwork and it's people. It's Trevor, it's James, it's Judd, it's Leslie, it's Crystal, it's Klazina, it's Joel now, very recently. It's myself, it's Curtis, that's what it is. And it doesn't mean that it has all the answers. It just means that we get together in a meeting and go, now what? What are we going to do in this situation? Well, let's call somebody, see if they got some advice. Let's call somebody that might know something about that. And that's what an organization is. And at some point, somebody has to make a decision, and the decision's made, and sometimes it's not the right decision or the best decision. But sometimes making a decision is better than not making a decision. So that's the reality of an organization, is people that, just like anybody else, has to make decisions and move on and learn from the results of that. And that's what we've been doing and trying to do. Just so you know, AngelOne has 3 layers. It has the board, like any other organization, has a board of directors, and then, which I'm part of, Judd is part of, Curtis, Paul Carney, Bill Labor, Randy, I'm forgetting Randy's last name at the moment, but Ferguson, yes, thank you. That's the board of directors, and then several of the board members, myself, Curtis, and Judd, and Bill, also are part of the management team that meets once a week with the operations team and reviews how things are going, provides advice, authorizes expenditures, etc. And then the operations team, which is James and Trevor and the whole office staff and everybody else, and the bookkeeping that makes everything work on a day-to-day basis. And out of that, Judd is the only full-time individual. All the rest of them work on a part-time basis because honestly, most of them could make better money somewhere else and do make better money other places, but they're able to give part-time at a reduced salary or rate to AngelOne and help keep things going. So that is basically how AngelOne functions at a practical level. What is AngelOne? And there's a lot of questions and a lot of different perspectives. I'm going to look at it from who you are interaction with AngelOne. If you're a mission aviation project, we provide a charitable funding pathway. All the paperwork and everything else that goes with that. As nonprofits in both the United States and Canada, it's a charitable pathway that you can become part of and fund to raise funds, etc. We try to be a support network. We don't always have the answers, but when it comes to advice, when it comes to resources to try to connect people to other people that have the knowledge, we're There's big dreams that someday helping get a part supply thing going a little better, et cetera. Those kind of things. We try to solve the problems that are brought to us the best of our ability. We can't do everything, unfortunately. Potential aircraft. We try to fundraise, get donations, get aircraft donated, place the helicopter in the Philippines, have another one coming up shortly, those kind of things. And I'll get into the details of that a little bit later and some of the challenges that presents, but we're trying to be that support network for mission projects in the field. Now, guess what? AngelOne doesn't run its own projects. We don't have an AngelOne project in the field where it's AngelOne people running the AngelOne project. That's currently not the goal of AngelOne. That we'll get there someday, and that may be a necessity of starting a new project or something like that, maybe. But that's not our focus. Our focus is supporting existing projects or new projects, starting out, being that support network, access to training, knowledge, et cetera, and of course a charitable channel, et cetera. So we're not trying to run projects. The reality is we've got more on our plate than we can handle right now, basically, and we're barely keeping up with demand as it is. If you're a supporter, if you support Mission Aviation, we provide a accountable nonprofit and responsible stewardship. We're trying to make sure that our paperwork is transparent as possible. We have yearly audits from an independent auditor that looks at all the paperwork and does all that kind of checking. We're trying to make sure that as an organization we can remain reputable to donors, et cetera. And if you're a mission pilot in training, again, it's a point where if you reach a certain point in your mission training where you're getting ready to launch the field, then you can start a charitable pathway to raise funds to help with that launch process, potential access to aircraft. Where's Belgrove at the moment? I don't see him in here. Anyway, he's currently, there's Belgrove, who's currently utilizing AngelOne aircraft for training purposes, et cetera. We're trying to encourage the starting out pilots, younger pilots, not to get lost in that long process from private pilot all the way through to being ready to launch to the mission field, to keep that connection going. Direct connection to the projects in the mission field. If you're a pilot getting interested, we can get you in contact with PAMIS or wherever, all the projects that we're connected with, help you get in that, go there for a visit if needed, et cetera, and support and encouragement. So this is pretty much what AngelOne, just trying to connect the dots. That's what we're trying to do in a sense, and be there for the projects. It's all the same goal. It's all furthering the work of God. It's not about one thing or another. It's where it's at. Let's talk about the charitable pathway for a second. What is, and for those in the mission field, what is some of the biggest challenge and one of the biggest limitations, and I know it's probably not actually money, and a lot of people think it is. How many here would say it's time? Not enough time to accomplish the work you have to do, et cetera. Is that a major challenge? Do you face time and good people to expand that work and keep doing it? And good people require their time. And from my perspective, this side of things, it looks like time is one of the biggest limiting factors. Either the people that are already there or finding other good people to give their time, et cetera. And yes, there's a time and money equation. We're not going to get bogged down in that at the moment. But let's talk about faith for a second. And GRC just did a really great presentation talking about some, I'd say, more extreme faith, which is awesome. And I appreciate that. And the reality is that a charitable organization and mission projects work on a faith basis, not only in the sense of faith in God to provide and faith to move forward and faith in your personal life, but it works. The donor has faith in the organization having using the funds appropriately and with good stewardship. The organization has faith in the mission project using the funds and reaching the end user as they're meant to be used. So from the chain, from the donor all the way to the very end project, there's faith that that chain holds all the way through and is not misdirected or even unintentionally wasted, so to speak, on poor management, et cetera. So there is faith in that whole process. And I know it can be frustrating sometimes because guess what? Let's run a hypothetical here. And I know that we have a lot of bookkeeping requirements and those kind of things in the state side we have to deal with. And let's just talk about a hypothetical situation. You're in the mission field, you're 5 hours from home in the big city, getting stocked up for the next 3 weeks, heading back out to the project. You're in there, you go to back up, that ticking sound in the Burfield joint in the Toyota Land Cruiser for the last 6 months all of a sudden makes manifest because it blows up on you, and you figured, well, we should have gotten that fixed 6 months ago when it started ticking, but it didn't happen. It's the mission field. And now you're driving around, you have 2 options, which is either 1, try to get it fixed, or 2, you can drive home in low range because the Toyota engineers didn't bother making the center diff lockable outside of low range. Don't ask me how I know all this. So now you're in town and you got a broken vehicle, and now you've got to try to find parts. So you find a shop that can replace it, but of course they don't have parts, and nobody's got new parts for 1996 Land Cruiser. So now you talk to them, and they call somebody else, and they call somebody else, and they call somebody else, and now somebody over here has a scrap one that has a complete front axle. You can probably get the parts out. So you go over there, and yes, they have the parts, but they want an exorbitant amount of money, and you don't happen to have the cash on hand, so now you got to go to the ATM. So you go to the ATM, but you realize you already maxed out your daily withdrawal because you bought all the parts for everything you needed for the extra week. So you call the other missionary to loan them their card to get things. You use their card to pull money out, and you get back on the motorcycle taxi, and you're just wondering about the guy seeing you max out at ATM and thinking the wisdom of that. And then you ride back over, you buy the part, to get that load on another motorcycle taxi because you can't fit a part on both plus you. And you ride back to the other shop, and you get it in there, and you pay for it. And as you walk out the door, it's pouring rain because it's rainy season. It started to rain in the meantime, and you're finally getting ready to get back in the Land Cruiser. And what's the last thing on your mind at that point? Because right then the phone rings, and it's a student missionary back at the project who's been there for all of a week, and he happened to run the motorbike off the road in the rain and bent the front tire, and he's panicking on the side of the road. And now you got to try to get a church member to go pick him up and the motorcycle and get them back to the project because he's freaking out because he got a scuffed elbow in the process. And what's the last thing on your mind at that moment? It's the receipt that you picked up. It's now laying in the rain somewhere that somebody's going to send you email of 4 months later and go, by the way, the auditors sitting in an air-conditioned office in the U.S. want that receipt. And I get how ridiculous that feels in that moment. You know what I mean? That's exactly how ridiculous it feels. Is who cares? Who cares about that little handwritten receipt that somebody scribbled and handed to you in, $40,000 in pesos or whatever it was, whoever you're at, or if it's Zimbabwe, it's $10 million. But who cares about that little piece of paper? But that whole chain links all the way back to some auditor sitting in office and going, hey, where's this other $300 here that's missing that didn't get written down? What was it used for? You know what I mean? So we're trying to find ways to make that easier. We're trying to find ways to eliminate those steps. And the reality is, though, this is how, as an organization, the challenges we have to face. And these are the boxes that we have to play inside of. And we have IRS rules, we have insurance rules, we have organizational agreements, we have Canadian revenue rules, we have FAA rules when it comes to aviation. Guess what? That nice little center square, that's what we have left to work in after you overline all those boxes and everything we have to play with. And I get it. It's all artificial in a sense. But guess what? All of these companies, all these organizations, all that, they're not like us. They don't work on a faith basis. They only work on the letter of the law. And yes, in all the scenarios that we operate in, we're working well within the spirit of the law, but these guys work on the letter of the law. And yes, we can be creative, and we can play with definitions and be as creative as possible to make it work in reality, but we still have to have accountability to this at the end of the day. And that's the challenge as an organization operating in these scenarios, is how do we make sure that at the end of the day, that situation doesn't cause problems for the whole chain and process. I'm exaggerating slightly for the comedic effect. But this is a bit of the reality that we work with on a daily basis at AngelOne, is how do we make that process. I know we just talked about finances here, mostly what I'm talking about this moment, but it does apply to other areas when it comes to insurance and liability and those kind of things that we have to work within and try to make those processes work. So, and this is one of those questions, and it just stands for any organization that does supporting mission aviation, whether it's us, whether it's OCI, or AFM's a little different model because they're all in one package, so to speak, so it's a little bit different what they work with. But when you have an organization like AngelOne that then passes through the majority of the funds that come to it to other charitable organizations or projects, particularly overseas, there's a lot of little moving parts to make that work in a way that can be sustained over the long term. And at the end of the day, there are discussions about how that can work effectively. And I put this photo up just to prove to everybody and that AngelOne itself makes mistakes. Even very experienced pilots make mistakes. Again, slight unfamiliarity of aircraft. And you get a nice little ground loop, and that's what happens. So let's look at a practical example of some of the challenges AngelOne's trying to do, and it's that complexity of trying to support a project in the field as much as possible, but then also have some accountability to the process, so to speak. Because at the end of the day, you have AngelOne, and that marker's not very impressive. Maybe you have AngelOne, and we're here, and we have all these concerns that we have to deal with in terms of rules and finances and all that fun stuff. Yeah, great. But as a practical matter, we need to be good stewards of the funds that God entrusts to us. It's not just, oh, we need to keep a reputation for the donors, we need to do this, that, or the other thing. We do need to be a responsible steward of the funds that God entrusts to us. And in that process, the funds that come in and say, let's say we're supporting a project and we got a large donation and we're going to purchase an aircraft to, I'm going to use the term lease. It's a $0 lease, but that's the best way to understand the process. And you have a project over here. And we're going to provide an aircraft to that project. Horrible drawing of aircraft. And the reality is somebody donated $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 to make that aircraft purchase available. And then when that aircraft goes out to the field and something like that happens, we're going to have questions. Was it insured? Was the pilot given minimal training standards? Those are the kind of questions we get back by people that write $200,000 and $300,000, $400,000 checks. And this ends it, I want to be 100% clear here, that's not our primary concern in a sense though, because guess what? If we're sending this aircraft out and God is entrusting with those funds, would it make sense to look after that investment that God has given us the funds for, to have insurance on it and to make sure the pilots have some minimum training standards? We get it, accidents happen, people make mistakes, but if we've done some due diligence on our part to look after that, then we can say, well, maybe that's the way it is. But sometimes we need to make sure that we don't shrug our shoulders and not care about funds that could have been used for something else that have now gone to waste, or an aircraft like this one that just as of this last week was back in operation a year later. And you look at what happens when you have aircraft go down in the mission field and you think of the months, maybe years delay that you can't use that aircraft or the services intended for it can't be provided because of that. And you go, well, what was it? And again, accidents happen. Last year we had, I think, 4 aircraft damaged or out of service in just an Adventist sector alone. And some of those were pilot errors, some of it was a storm, some of them incredibly tragic with no answers. So there's that aspect to look at. But coming back to this scenario, now this aircraft, unfortunately, has strings attached to it because It's being provided to the organization at no cost. It has some strings attached to it. Minimum standards, insurance requirements, those kind of things. And then we got a pilot in training. And they've had different stops along the way. And now they're over here launching to the mission field. And now they're working for this project. But guess what? They started a year ago in the Mind the Gap program of AngelOne, borrowing an aircraft to use and doing that. Fundraising for the last 6 months before they got ready to launch to the mission field. All those processes. And then they come over here, and now they're working for this project. And that's the key word, they're working for that project. And this is discussions that we have at AngelOne Leadership for hours. How do we have a pilot that's been actively supported through AngelOne and has a relationship with us go to a project, and we have an AngelOne aircraft at that project that AngelOne has a vested interest in making a certain standard, but they're both being used by this project, and this project is run independently. And our discussions we have time and time again is how do we make sure there is some accountability, but we don't get in the way of this project. Because we're not in the field, we don't understand the exact needs and uses of that project. It's not our job to micromanage that. We're trying to provide support. We're trying to get people out there. But once they're out there, once this pilot's out here, they're working for that project. And they're going to need to overcome the challenges involved with that without AngelOne getting in the middle of this whole mix. And we're trying to provide this support. We try to provide it on the human element through James to provide counseling, through those kind of things, to make this process as smooth and as easy as possible. However, there's always going to be misunderstandings and expectations that are different and conflicts that arise out of that we try to work through. So this is some of the challenges we're facing at a very practical level of being a supporting organization that's trying to support existing and new projects and have some accountability for the expenditures and assets being put out into the field at the same time without getting in those projects' way. Does that make sense? So this is some of the practical level stuff we're trying to work through as an organization. And as an organization, we've been around a whole lot of 3 years or something like that. And it's a lot to try to figure out, particularly since none of us have done it before. And we're making it up as we go, and we try to find solutions and answers, and we don't all have the wisdom involved. So we're very thankful to the existing projects, Dwayne particularly, in helping us navigate some of those challenges that we run into in this whole process. And at the end of the day, AngelOne, we're just here to support. We're not here trying to do much beyond that, and that's keeping us more than busy enough as it is. And yes, we would love to have a training program that pilots could come to and go through. We would love to be able to send people to AFM or the GC training program for culture shock and how to move through that whole process. And this would be a great thing. We're working on trying to put a pathway together of all these options for new people heading out to the field. We're working on how to better support aircraft in the field, and we question on minimum standards. Okay, what's really required? What do we need to do here? How insistent do we need to be on this aircraft meeting a certain operational standard, et cetera? And there's dollars amounts attached to all of that discussion: insurance, maintenance, et cetera. And it comes back to faith that the donors try to trust the organization, we trust the projects in the field, and we all trust God to look after his assets and ultimately it's his money. And I don't want this discussion to be entirely about money, but unfortunately that's what we deal with on a daily basis to a degree. AngelOne is trying to move that and get it on through the field. And there's errors in that whole process. Accounting mistakes get made, et cetera, and we have to sort them out and get that taken care of because we're all human. I want to take this time and have any questions from anybody about AngelOne, et cetera, or honestly, if anybody has solutions to how to make this whole process work better, we would love it.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
We work in Northern Vanuatu, and we're involved in a denominational school and a denominational wellness centre, and we're operating what we call Wings of Hope Flying Doctor Service, which up to now is not actually a legal entity, it's actually just a service that I provide as an individual, but there is a team working together under that name. But what we have discovered is that, like you said, it's so easy for confusion to arise about how these entities work together or what they're trying to achieve. But one thing that we have learned through that experience is the separation of entities does assist in, like, if different entities are given different roles, it keeps it clean. Whereas if it was just a kind of soup of all these entities working together, it gets very messy. So I was just thinking of what you were saying just now. Basically what you're saying is you want to separate, AngelOne wants to separate the responsibility, the idea of assisting from the financial support, just off the cuff.
We're not trying to separate, we're here to provide a charitable channel. That's the start of why AngelOne started. And just like your project, you don't have a nonprofit organization, either Vanuatu or somewhere else under the same name to support your operations. So AngelOne's a perfect example of needing a charitable pathway and being able to provide that to a project like yours or any other project. A good example where that's not needed is Peru Project is an AngelOne partner, but they already have their own charitable channel. They don't need AngelOne to provide that service. Instead, we're working with them for some safety and other aspects, and instead of a charitable channel, which we're happy to work with instead. So that is one element we have to work with. And I'm just explaining this is the reality of what we're working through as an organization. We're not saying it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's just the reality of what we're having to work with. And I wanted to touch on another slight aspect of this is that it's challenging sometimes working within the rules because Canadian Revenue and IRS, it's very difficult to make sure we have to make sure a project meets a certain definition or qualification to be able to channel funds to it. Because unfortunately we can't support individuals. We can't just write checks to individuals, even in the mission field doing the work. It has to be through some kind of project, which makes that more challenging. So even when you have someone raising funds through Mind the Gap, then they need to be connected with the project or going to be connected with the project so we can channel funds for their support and fundraising and those kind of things. So again, it's playing within those rules and making it work.
Yeah, what I was actually meaning was that it may be helpful, I don't know, just throwing ideas around, it may be helpful to have a separate entity that channels the funds from the sort of service ministry, like what AngelOne exists for is to assist other ministries. But for channeling funds, would it be helpful to create a separate entity?
Not particularly, at least not from stateside perspective. I'm not sure in the field. The other challenge we're having is on the marketing side because we're trying to make sure that we communicate the nuance that AngelOne supported projects are their own projects and not AngelOne itself, so that we can keep that distinction kind of clear, because PAMIS is PAMIS, or Miracle Air is Miracle Air. I'm not even sure what we're calling the one in Africa yet. Yes. It's going to be called Yes. No. The Child Impact and Riverside Farm collaboration in Africa. So we want to make sure that the projects can maintain their own identity and they don't get lost in the AngelOne umbrella, so to speak. A good best example, probably in Adventist Systems, OCI. You have OCI, and then they support all these different ministries around the world, but they're an umbrella type organization, and that's kind of what AngelOne's trying to do effectively. The other thing is AngelOne, unfortunately, it's not free to do all this. You know, James, Trevor, their families still need to eat dinner every day, and even though they're a part-time basis and do other work, they still work one's worthy of the hire to a degree. So that costs money, and AngelOne's trying to make sure that in the process of building AngelOne as an organization and brand, that we don't, and I'm going to use this term because I don't have a better one at the moment, we don't compete with the same donor base that our projects do. And I don't want to have that misconstrued in the thought that it is a competition, because I believe God has the funds available, and it's not a zero-sum game. We're not all competing for a limited pool of funds. But from a marketing standpoint, we don't want to try to tag on to the long-standing donors that the projects have curated and developed relationships for years. We want to make sure that we develop our own pool of donors to support AngelOne, separate from the donors that do faithfully support those projects.
Wings over Zambia is the plan.
Wings over Zambia? It's not through the paperwork yet? Okay. Are there any other questions or comments or brilliant solutions to what we talked about? Curtis, Trevor, James, do you have anything to add?
No, I like that diagram showing, yeah, you know that one. Because unfortunately, we get some frustration from the mission field sometimes. But we for sure know that they don't understand some of the rules we have to work within. And so I think that helped me, and I already knew most of that. So I'm glad you covered that.
Norman?
You know, from the experience we've had in the past, working with, well, I don't have a lot of experience, but the other organizations, like you say, this costs a lot of money to do what AngelOne is doing. And for us to start a project, for example, in Fiji or anywhere else, independently, would be magnitudes more difficult than it is without AngelOne. And AngelOne is not charging us what these services are worth. In fact, they're essentially charging almost nothing at cost, if anything, and not even that, because as he says, you know, the operation and salary. So, from my point of view, this is just amazing. I can't believe the services that we receive. And so for these, you know, people that are starting to be able to just raise money for your flight training, just for loan or fuel or whatever, to borrow an aircraft or whatever. I just hope it can continue and expand, because without it, I think Advent as mission aviation will suffer.
Hold on one second. Let's go to Jeff, and I'll come back to you.
I would just appreciate your guys' efforts in trying to unite Adventist aviation. I want to support it, help in every way that I can. You know, there's always in your operationally, there's always going to be challenges. I will say this: everything requires trust. You're going to have to trust people. Donors have to trust missionaries. Missionaries trust donors. Organizations trust the people that work with them. And honoring those trusts are critical. I would always encourage you. That would be something that would be.
And that's when we work in scenarios like this. We're trying to actually figure out how to write agreements with some nuance, so that everybody's on the same page. So those perceptions that cause confusion and damage that don't happen.
There's always going to be challenges, and there's, I don't know that there's ever a way necessarily to avoid everything. There's always miscommunications. You can write the best document on the planet. People are going to read it differently, and you're going to have to work through those things. So it's good. I'm not saying don't put the effort. I'm just going to say even that you put colossal amounts of effort, it's not going to stop that from ever happening, and that's okay. You know, I think we have to work together. You're never gonna. We're never gonna get anywhere if we just work by ourselves. And if you're working together, some things are gonna go the way you think they should go, and some things aren't gonna go the way you think you should go. And you can, if you're willing to work on a team, well, you're willing to carry on and just keep going and support. And you know, you could look at there's so many ways you could look at things. You could say, from a project, if an organization cut loose an airplane and gave it to them, then they could feel like oh, they lost it, or they could feel like they gained it, or if a project gave back an airplane to another organization, they could feel like they lost it, or you could feel like they gained it. It's about perspective, but we're all on the same team. It's in the same pot. It's the same mission. You know, it's easy to kind of stress some of those nuances, but as we keep seeking to follow Jesus, and as we keep seeking to move his mission forward, he'll lead his people. And I believe he's leading you guys. I believe he's leading Thomas and Miracle Air and DJ there in Bolivia, myself. And so anyway, I just, that attitude of collaboration is most certainly critical, that we all have to share. So that giving spirit that AngelOne has of collaborating, we all have to have. That's what makes it work. It's we all give. We're all here to share. It's not about, I remember in my mission service, I had a personal crisis when I wanted to hold on to my donors, and the Lord had a little talk with me and said, whose donors are those? Are those your donors? Oh, those are your donors. And we had a nice little conversation. It was quite painful, and I got set straight. And that donor, I still remember, he wrote a check for $30,000. I'd never gotten a check for $30,000. He just wrote it like nothing. And but you know what's really neat? God blessed me in spite of that. And I mean, now I'm looking 12 years, 13, 14, 15 years ago. The whole experience was a big crisis moment for me, but God moved me past that and blessed me beyond that. But our human nature, we kind of want to get tunnel vision into those things real easy. But it's not my donor or Evan's donor, it's God's thing. And he has a way to move on people's hearts. And if he wants to write a $5 check or a $30,000 check, well, he can do whatever he jolly well pleases.
And I think that's where we all need to be faith-wise. And at AngelOne, I think we understand that. At the end of the day, we have to work within the money that's sitting in the bank account that's tied to a particular project. And we have to make that work.
Yeah, you've got that. You've got those. And committing, following through with commitments is really key. If we said we're going to do something, follow through with that. And that goes on. These are bilateral things in every kind of treatment that we're doing. It's not just AngelOne, it's projects. It's, hey, if you've taken an airplane and you've said you're going to do these things with it, well, then you need to honor the commitments that you said you're going to do. If not, you need to return and follow through with the agreements that we've made. These are all important to making things operate well.
Mark?
Yeah. No, I was just thinking how benevolent AngelOne's mission is, which is really outstanding. It kind of, the way I think of it is very similar to what ASI is trying to do to facilitate other ministries. And I guess it would, to me, that sounds like a kind of like a scary thing to be doing, because you're involved with ministries that you don't basically can't control fully, and you're trying to facilitate and trying to make things happen. And then you risk being identified with any mistakes or any issues that ministry may be seen to be doing. And so, but that is actually, it's a really wonderful thing to do, in that you're basically facilitating mission, and there's always going to be risk involved in that. And yeah, I think what you're describing up here is how do you actually do that so that you don't have issues down the track. But it's so benevolent what AngelOne is trying to do.
We're trying to make sure that there's clear expectations when we work with projects about what AngelOne can and can't do at a practical level, so that there's not unrealistic expectations or problematic expectations that create the unnecessary conflict when, oh, we thought you guys could do this, and then, well, we can't, sorry, and then it's like, well, you know, there's those kind of expectations. So we're trying to work on getting better at being clear about what AngelOne can and can't do, particularly at a practical level with any given project, and set those expectations correctly. Let's see, Belgrove, Samuel, and then Evan, and then we need to wrap up quickly.
I wanted to say how grateful I am for AngelOne and the blessing it was to just find them and connect with them. But I think the Mind the Gap program is extremely important and helpful to the missionary pilots in training. Why? Because they've never had the opportunity to have an aircraft to manage. So there are things they have to figure out on their own that they can actually figure out, okay, am I actually built for this? You have an aircraft at the airport, you have to find a hangar for it, you've got to find a tie down for it, you have to build relationships with people at the airport, then you have to find your own instructor, then if it breaks, you have to be able to contact, the people, the organization. The aircraft has broken a few times, and the amazing thing is I've been able to call Mr. Judd, call Mr. Trevor. They've been able to help and nurture me and help me realize that, yeah, it breaks, but there's ways to fix it, and then we can go and find our own EMP. So what it does is it helps the missionary pilot in training actually learn how to be a missionary pilot and understand that, they're not just hopping in the airplane and flying, and if it breaks, they call somebody and say, oh, I'm going to put it to the FBO and have them fix it. It's we have to manage the aircraft like it's ours. And that gives you the feeling like, okay, at this point, it's God's airplane, but it's something that he's giving me to steward and take care of. So if I fly with somebody, I'm going to be very careful of who I fly with, how I fly. The other thing that it does is at the FBOs, they see this young guy with an airplane always flying. They're like, wait, it's at your airplane, and you can tell the story of AngelOne and what you're doing. So it's able to help the missionary pilot figure out if he wants to do it, and then also be a testimony to those who see as well. And then so many people who see that drive of the missionary pilot, they're able to help them, and they feel like they're there and helping for a cause, and they'll follow you for the rest of your life, seeing your story. Those are the things I've experienced. And then also, if it's not cut out for you, at least you didn't spend thousands of dollars realizing, and later when you're in the mission field, you're like, wait, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't know it was this way. So that's why I think like this specific program, Mind the Gap program, is so helpful, and I'm appreciative for it.
Thank you, Belgrove. And as Jeffrey said, it takes trust. We're loaning out an aircraft to brand new pilots to manage, make work.
Everything we do in this life, something more worth it. Risk, benefit, reward. That's
Yeah.
got a good benefit. Yeah.
Samuel.
I know this is going to bring up a lot of history, but I think history is worth studying so we don't repeat mistakes. The mission of the church is to send missionaries. And I know the Adventist Church, the GC, has owned aircraft in the past. They still do own aircraft. What are the current challenges with the GC? Why is the GC not able to take the place that AWA or AngelOne is now filling? Obviously there's a gap there that needs filled. What are the current challenges with the GC that they're not able to fill? And Nathan's task here is working a lot with the GC right now. What are ways that we could help them to solve those problems?
I'm not going to have the answer to that because I'm not involved in those discussions at all with the GC type level. Nathan will have the best answers of anybody here along those lines, and I know it stems back to liability concerns and all those challenges. And I'm not sure where the progress is being made in that at the moment. Again, Nathan's going to have better than anybody else probably here in terms of where that's at.
As I see it, in an ideal world, AngelOne doesn't have to exist in its current state because the World Church is taking care of that.
In an ideal world, I agree there'd be no need for AngelOne, and to be clear, AngelOne grew out of necessity, not ambition.
Yeah, for sure.
I just to make a comment, the church excels at certain things it does really well in, and things that we don't do so well in. I'm very for organizing these little groups all over the place and setting up church boards and they do really well at what I call the nuclear structure of the church. Church boards, local members, and expanding that all the way up Union Division. And they work in that structure. Anytime you start coming out of that particular structure, they struggle. And the reason that you struggle is because you have a conflict of interest. And it's unavoidable. It's unavoidable. So you have a pastor who has passion about education, let's say, and he builds a school, and it goes well until that guy moves, and then the next pastor who comes in, well, he has the church structure, makes him run the church board and run the regular church. But if he doesn't have the passion for the school, it's tempting to want to sell that and do some other project that he wants to do. So what AngelOne does with a vested, we're a group of people who are passionate about chunks of aluminum that get fly. We all share that passion, that's why we're sitting here. There's not a lot of other people that are interested in coming to Oklahoma to talk about those things.
Especially in July.
In July, there's not a lot of other attractions, like Orlando, there's other things, you might wanna go see, but not, if you're coming here, it's because you're really a nut for airplanes and missions. So, that piece, it's just in all fairness, conflict of interest is a reality. It happens in all organizations. It's just part of life. We all have different interests, and we put priorities at different levels, and God puts it on different people's hearts. I'm so glad He's the orchestrator. So I have no condemnation for the church because of their, okay, well, they haven't just taken this huge vested interest. Airplanes are massive money pits, just massive. And so if you're an administrator and you look at across the needs, things that need to happen, and you're like, oh, this guy needs $1 million for an airplane. You're like, but I need, 300 Bible workers, and I could do that with, 20,000. Why would I, So stuff doesn't happen. But when you take a specialty group that has that passion, says, don't you worry about that, we're going to take care of it. Then those pieces get put into place that God, and it's not that it's one is worse than the other. It's just
Not only that, but they're finding different donors. They're
Oh,
getting
yeah.
supported from different avenues. It comes back to this idea of separate entities for different purposes. And I'm just wondering if that would help AngelOne still, but we can discuss that later. But anyway, the whole idea of the church, the denomination doing its thing and a ministry doing its thing in God's plan, I think that's the masterpiece of how the Adventist mission, wider than the church entity, the actual movement, the Seventh-day Adventist movement, involves a lot of entities. And that's just how God has set that up. And I believe we need to pursue that.
And I think it's amazing how God uses people with passion and talent in different areas and finds a way to utilize those passion and talent. We just heard from Gideon Rescue on how they find ways to use their talent and passions in many different ways that are beneficial. Evan.
Thank you. I wanted to mention, express the gratitude and express how thankful I am for this unity of mission aviation that is happening with AngelOne. Definitely, as Wayne mentioned in the morning, that unity has been something we've been needing to be kind of little corner of the world. And even though we knew some people little by little we meet, this has created a bigger sense of help and unity. From the beginning, just a little experience, Bradley and I, we even kind of joking and talking, so are we members of AngelOne or are we not members of AngelOne? Because first we had that membership picture,
Yeah.
and we were like, should we do it? And we had some sour experience with an umbrella ministry that tried to fundraise for us, but basically just replicated our webpage with another name, and we never saw any dollar. So we knew clearly that AngelOne, because we knew John, and they were not trying to use us. It was very evident, but we couldn't understand what was going to be. But as you guys went there, as we've been involved in the chat, in the bi-monthly meetings, we are very happy to be part of this AngelOne and the ministry, and we pray that it can open up even more doors. As Jeff mentioned, we're here also, we are here to give, even between us ministries. We were in Bolivia, like 3 months ago, and with the ministries of OCI in South America, and one of the thoughts that came when the leaders we were talking, it was that normally we as ministries, we don't want to send our best to other ministries because we want to keep them. But how beautiful picture would be if we're willing to send our best and just create a bigger support for God's glory.
Well, I've already taken up way too much time out of Bob's panel, so you got a real quick comment, DJ?
Well,
I just wanted to respond to the question about the church. In OCI, that's something we talk about a lot. And I think we should celebrate, we have a worldwide organization. And like Jeff says, it's very good at some things. And you can go almost anywhere in the world. There's some countries where it's still pretty slim, but you can go almost anywhere and find an Adventist and have family. And they're good at that. Big organizations are good at being worldwide. But what they're not good at is going into new, being flexible, being mobile, going into new areas. That's difficult for them. And that's our ministry in Bolivia specifically exists for that. Where the church ends, that's where we begin. Of course, there's overlap, and we enjoy overlapping with them. That's fun, and it's often convenient, but we exist to go beyond that. And I think aviation in many places is a going beyond where the church will have an effective reach. And so I see it as a good thing that there are people that are passionate that'll take mission aviation and keep it plugged into the church, but use it to go beyond where they would be able to reach by themselves.
Well, thank you everyone for the comments. I want to wrap up real quick by saying that AngelOne, we're here to support, because guess what? We're not the people running around in the rain on a motorcycle trying to figure problems out. We're not the ones that are spending our lives dedicating it to God's work there on the ground. We're trying to do what we can here to keep that whole process going. And thank you to each of you that are out there doing that on a daily basis. And
I'd just like to thank you guys, like many people have, but generosity is contagious. And Evan mentioned that with OCI. OCI has been that to many of us. And that generosity is starting to catch on amongst the ministries. We're starting to help each other. We're starting to care about each other and think bigger picture, and how can we help others reach the darkest places of the world. And I see AngelOne fostering that same culture. I appreciate it.
And I wanted to actually leave everyone with a question, because it's one I've been thinking about for a while. And I know that so often we look at faith, particularly demonstrated at extremities, where we're out of all other resources and God works miraculously to make that work. But particularly when it comes to aviation, particularly when it comes to safety and those kind of things, that I wonder, is the faith in pushing the limits and working in the margins, or is the faith in trusting to God that He'll provide the resources and people to keep it so we don't have to push in the margins? That He'll provide the money and people to maintain equipment properly and provide the training and everything else and the funds and the time to do that at the end of the day, rather than having to feel like we need to push into the margins to demonstrate our faith. Which one truly has the stronger faith? That's all yours.
I think, I just wanted to comment to that. I think that when we go out to do something, the margins will get pushed. But we shouldn't go out there with the intention of pushing the margins.
And what I meant by that is that sometimes people, the stories you hear of things being on borderline maintenance, things being in borderline outside of training and those kind of things, because people didn't have the time or the money to do the maintenance or get the proper training, etc. And then you think about, is God limited so He can't provide that we can be the best, so to speak? Anyway, leave me with a question. I don't have the answer to it. Okay, Bob has the panel next, and if you guys want to grab a quick break, and then he'll get his panel set up and good to go next thing. And after that, it's supper and flying games.
All right.